Hello everyone, welcome back. My name is Grace and today I'll be cooking a stuffed squash recipe for you guys. So first of all, our ingredients are 1 acorn squash, but any squash will do. Canola, I have canola oil here. The recipe calls for olive oil, but any vegetable oil will be fine. I have my salt and pepper, my onion, my garlic, though mine is pre-minced, and then either cherry tomatoes or canned tomatoes. I have canned tomatoes here. My chili seasoning, and then the cheese is optional, that would go on at the end, and then my choice of meat here was ground beef. As for equipment, you will need a cutting board in order to cut the squash, cut the onion, etc. Measuring cups to measure out. You'll probably need a spoon in order to scoop out the seeds from the squash, the knife itself to cut the squash, and then a baking sheet in which you will need to line it with foil or baking spray, a bowl in order to mix the stuffing that will go into the squash, and then finally I'm going to be using a pot to cook my rice from dry. You can have it pre-cooked already and just heat it up in the microwave, but I'm going to use this to cook the onion as well. Okay, so the first step now is to preheat the oven to 400 degrees. So let me get this up and running. And then also, since I'm starting from dry rice, I'm going to need to cook it first. So I'm going to start by pouring my rice into my measuring cup here. And about 1/3 of a cup dry will roughly equate to 3/4 of a cup cooked, which is what the recipe calls for. So here's my rice. And then I'm going to pour it in the pot. And then normally you want to do about equal portions of rice to water. I'm going to add some water here. And then I like to give it a couple rinses first before actually putting it on the stove. So I'll go ahead and do that. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and put this rice on the stove and get it started cooking so that it'll be done by the time the oven is ready. Okay, so while the oven is preheating and my rice is starting to cook, I'm going to go ahead and line my baking sheet with foil. So now my baking sheet looks like this, and that way it'll be ready for the squash when the oven is finished heating. Now we're going to prepare the actual squash itself. So first I'm going to rinse it off, maybe give it a good scrub, get any loose dirt off of there. Okay, so here's my squash, and I'll get ready to cut it. Okay, so here's my squash on the cutting board. So the instructions are to cut the bottom point off to create a flat surface. So like so. I didn't get all of it. Give me a second here. Okay, good enough. Alright, and then to also cut the stem part off, this here, to create another flat surface. There are a couple marks here because it was tough and I realized I was running into the stem itself. But when cutting, you want to hold your knife like so, and make sure you don't accidentally cut yourself, and also remember to use your knuckles as a guide so you don't accidentally chop your fingers off. So, going to give this a go. There we go. Okay, so now we've got a flat surface. And then afterwards we're going to cut this in half. It says widthwise, but I'm just going to cut it like so because I feel like that makes more sense. So I'm just gonna stab this in here and crack her open. Okay, and it sounds like the oven is ready. So here's the squash cut in half. So now I'm going to need to scoop out the seeds and the stringy part before cooking it. Okay, so now that the seeds and stringy parts have been scooped out of the squash and the oven went off earlier indicating that it was ready, the next step is to drizzle the squash with a little bit of oil and then dress it with a little bit of salt and pepper. So I'm going to take my oil here and maybe use a teaspoon. I don't want to put too much oil on there. And drizzle it across like so. Okay, maybe spread it around a bit. Oh, I got more oil. Okay. So now that the squash is finished being dressed, we're going to put it on the baking sheet so that it can actually bake. The instructions now are to put the squash cavity side down. So we're going to put it upside down like this onto the baking sheet. So I'll go ahead and do that, and I'll get ready to put it in the oven. Okay, so now that the squash has been placed on the baking sheet, I'm going to don my oven mitt here and put the squash in the oven. Okay, and then the instructions are to keep it in there for 35 minutes or until it's fork tender. I'm just going to put it in the oven for 35 minutes. So let me put the timer on. Okay, and all we have to do is wait for that to cook, and in the meantime I'll start preparing the stuffing to go inside. So we're back at the cutting board. I have washed the cutting board to get the orange and stringy stuff off from cutting the squash. Now we are back to cut the onion. So again, reiterate those safe knife skills. Hold it like so. Remember your bare paw, not like this. And then I'm just going to use half of the onion. So and then it'll be time to get chopping. So now I've finished chopping the onion, and it seems that my rice is also done cooking as well. So I will move this out of the way, prepare the bowl, and get the rice in the bowl. Awesome, okay. So now that's one ingredient that we have added to the bowl. So now to add the others. Okay. And now I'm going to put my onions in the pot that I had initially used to cook the rice to caramelize the onions before adding them to the bowl here. So now I'm going to take my cutting board of cut up onions and put it into my washed pot here. And then I'll wait for them to caramelize, which should take somewhere around like 5 to 7 minutes, I think. And stirring occasionally, of course, so that they don't stick to the pot and get burned. There's still about 14 minutes left on the oven, so now it's just a matter of waiting until everything is cooked. Okay, so the oven has finished, and okay, so this is what they look like right now. And now we need to let them cool because we'll have to handle them with our hands eventually. So we'll need to let them cool until they're warm enough for us to handle with our hands. And then we'll flip them over and then fill the squash with the stuffing that we are making in the bowl. Okay, so the onion should be soft now. I'm going to take it off the heat. So notice how there's like a little bit of brown, maybe kind of hard to see here, but like there is some light browning going on, so it's entering that caramelization stage to make it a little bit sweeter. So we'll go ahead and add this to the bowl. Now this is what is inside of our bowl now. So that's the rice, my meat, the onions, the tomatoes, and a little bit of chili powder. And I nearly forgot the garlic, so I'm going to add just a little bit of that, maybe 1 teaspoon's worth. And then we're going to mix it all together. And then the squash is still cooling, of course. So when that finishes cooling and I can pick it up with my hands, then we'll put some of this mixture into the squash and then put it back in the oven for just a little bit longer. Okay, so I'm going to check on the squash here. It's easier to see. Yeah, that's warm enough that I don't mind touching it with my hands and I'm not burning myself. So flip these over. Okay, now we're going to take our filling here and scoop it in each of these. And it looks like I have a lot of filling left over, but that's okay. If you have more than one squash, then you can fill the remaining squashes with this one batch of filling. And then the last step is to put the squash, now stuffed, back in the oven for an additional 5 minutes. Set the timer for 5 minutes. So now that the stuffed squash is back in the oven, we will let it cook for an additional couple of minutes. I put it in for 5, however you think is long enough. At this point is where you would put the cheese on before putting it back in the oven if you wish to do so. But again, that is optional. So now we will wait another couple of minutes until it's finished cooking, and I will show you what the final product looks like. Okay, so that sounds like our stuffed squash is finished. Let me take this out. Alright. And just a little bit more and we'll conclude this video. And this is what it looks like when we're done.